This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. Exciting new DRF intro with our friends Travis Stone and Willie Nile helping us out. Willie Nile, of course, with the tune. You can get more of his music at willienile.com. And, of course, Travis Stone, the voice of the Kentucky Derby. I am Peter Thomas Fornatel back with you. Once again, I need a name for this room. It's not the Brooklyn Bunker because I'm above ground. It's still a little too cold down there. But I'm sitting here in Brooklyn, New York. My mind is on South Florida. And my co-host is physically in South Florida. You know him. You love him. He's the people's champ. He's got to do something to keep that microphone from scraping against his beard, or we're all going to go deaf during the show. He's Jonathan Kinchin. What's up, people's champ?
No, geez, I'm in trouble. Pete, I tell you, Pete hung up on me last week about a conversation we were having, and one of the other things that makes Pete mad at me is my sound issues. However,
how hard is it? The show is twice a week. It's 11 to 12. You can't just get in one place and sit there. Like, you've got to be running around the earth. Like, you got the private jet. You got the posse. You got stuff going on here, there, and everywhere. You got houses in, Las Vegas and Los Angeles and Miami Beach and Austin. But you have to rub it in our face, JK.
I'm actually going to tweet the picture. This is my life, I'm telling you. I am in a suite right now at Gulfstream, and I have no idea whose suite it is. I'm in Suite 8. I just walked in here, and I'm just hoping that I don't get kicked out before the show's over. And I'm not joking. I'm gonna tweet a picture right now of that, yeah, it's interesting. But I'm here. I've made it.
For our Eclipse Award winning producer, Craig, I do want to just say right now, when he gets kicked out on the air, JK, leave the microphone on, and it's going straight in the best of. Okay. So when we do the best of 2018, JK getting kicked out of the suite at Gulfstream will be there. Oh, and that reminds me, Craig, I want to go back. I think it's like 3 shows ago now, and my whole JK got rhymed story, that's going in the best of too. We should pull that out because I'll forget where it was.
Keep in mind that Pete, I know you haven't been down here recently, but the suite waiter is affectionately known as Big Mike. He is absolutely phenomenal. He goes into the Hall of Fame with Arcadia,
nice.
In terms of racetrack friends, and he's phenomenal. So at some point he'll come in, he'll be super happy, and he'll just try to start feeding me. He wants to bring food because they comp certain people's rooms, and he knows that, and so he just puts it on the big bettors rooms. He always has loot. He's always excited.
You probably shouldn't reveal that. You're blowing up the spot here.
No, but he does it for like Luch's room, right? Because Luch is here betting like a maniac, and so when I was hanging out with Luch a couple weeks ago, he always wanted to feed me. He's like, "Look, don't worry about it. You're gonna pay for it. Do you want something?" He bought Austin ice cream, and it's been phenomenal.
All right, Desiree has crossed you off the holiday card list for not giving her a shout out as one of the queens of racetrack hospitality. That's the first thing, and for the second thing, make sure you have an extra Tito's for me, okay?
It's your fault that just happened because you yelled at me. You made me insecure about my beard scratching the microphone, and I muted it when I didn't need to.
You can mute when you're not talking, but you got to be ready to unmute at like a second's notice. I mean, you're a broadcasting professional at this point, JK. You've done like 300 podcasts, for God's sakes. I just received word from Eric Bialik, by the way, that he has some questions for you that he, I guess, has texted to you. He believes they'd be appropriate for the show, JK. You could be the judge of that. All right, we've had a lot of nonsense so far in the show. In fact, it's been 5 full minutes of nonsense, and we have much more to talk about than an average show. So we're going to dive in and talk first about the Eclipse Awards. We're obviously going to get to the Pegasus World Cup betting challenge, in which, JK, you are a participant today. Actually, in all seriousness, thank you for carving an hour out of your schedule when you're playing in a $24,000 handicapping contest situation today. We do appreciate you coming on here and sharing thoughts and opinions. But let's start off talking about the Eclipse Awards. We'll get plenty of nonsense mixed in here. First of all, I'm just going to say straight off the bat, absolutely love Nick Luck as the host. He's one of my broadcasting heroes. I love the guy. Been watching him for many, many years from when I was, in the mid 2000s and obsessed with jump racing and finding tricky ways of pulling in the Racing UK broadcasts, and just always been a huge fan of Nick's right from the get-go. And I thought he knocked it out of the park, but I was a little worried. Now, I don't know if it was the way the room was mic'd or whatever. I wasn't sure if maybe the audience was a little square to get some of the jokes. So here's my question to you, JK. Did he kill it to the degree that I think he did, or was this sort of like a Letterman at the Oscars situation where the cool people know he did an amazing job, but sort of the squares didn't like it and he wasn't invited back? What are we dealing with there with Nick?
No, I mean, I think everyone enjoyed him, but I think you're right. I mean, and look, I was fortunate enough. This is going to sound weird, but I was fortunate enough to be able to go to dinner with Nick the night before, and he was concerned about that. He was worried that that it's a room of older elites, and so and it's not like
older elites and you apparently.
Yeah, it's not a room of like the Grammys has people that obviously have a lot of money, and the Oscars have people that have a lot of money. However, they're still creative types, and so they find joy in certain arts, and comedy being one of them. Well, this room is full of just a bunch of rich guys that own horses and rich people that own horses, and so I think it's a little bit of a tougher crowd, and he was concerned about that. But no, I think that a lot of his jokes went off well. I thought that him approaching Chad's table at the beginning and getting in that poke about you won a lot of big races and you also made a baby cry. I mean, I thought it was remarkable. So
it was a great line, and it did remind me of that sick individual who took that moment and turned it into a GIF and sent it around to everybody on Twitter. In fact, that's probably where Nick Luck saw it. So that sick person's legacy continues to grow.
I mean, who in the world would do something like that? I mean, why would you take a man's embarrassing moment and turn it into a data file that kind of can be tweeted and passed around forever? And who would even do it where they went to the NBC website and made sure they got it in HD so that that it was a higher quality? I mean, what a sicko.
I don't know who it was, JK, but I sure wouldn't want to host a podcast with him. For me, the line of the night, and I hope this isn't sensitive. I was curious how this one went over. The line of the night for me was after, Alex Waldrop came out and talked a little bit more about this wonderful development for horse players that the NTRA has been involved in, the tax regulations, which have already provided a significant boost to betting handle. Is obviously a great thing for horse players, no doubt about that. But Nick got off the line. If you can't give an award to yourself at your own award ceremony, who can you give one to?
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. The NTRA, in all right, I've been able to spend some time with some people from there over the last few days, and they understood the joke. They understood the joke.
They took it in the spirit which it was intended. It was not mean spirited.
And they deserve the joke, and they deserve the award, in all honesty. So it's actually kind of great. One of my great moments last night, I ran into a lot of people and got to see a lot of people and talk to a lot of great people, but I haven't had a chance to tell you this yet, Pete, but I ran into Saul Cumin, and I was like, hey, Saul, congratulations on Lady Eli. But listen, I want to get back here next year because we actually own a horse together. And this is the first time we're letting DRF Players Podcast listeners know that Pete Fornatell and I own a percentage of long on value with 10 Strike Racing and Marshall Graham and Clay Sanders and also with Saul Cumin. So I told him, I said, look, man, Lady Eli was great. Yeah, she had a cool career, but let's get back here next year with long on value. And he was excited, and so he told me to tell you he's happy to have us on board. So we'll hopefully we can get rich, and I can assure you, if you're doing any investigative work on our lives or our finances, it was not a significant piece of long on value.
Well, I had no idea we were. I didn't realize that was public knowledge, but it is certainly exciting. He's been a horse who's been featured and talked about on the podcast since pretty much since the early days. and exciting to get that opportunity courtesy of our friends at 10 Strike Racing. Really exciting partnership. Well, I think I'm going to try to crash their Arkansas Derby party again this year, too. Now that I'm in the family, it's almost like I won't be crashing, which is cool.
I actually think the day that you hung up on me, one of the things you told me was how great that party was. So I remember a lot of things about that day. It's going to stand out in history for me.
It really does. And JK, it just comes down to this. I just don't think the Breeders' Cup Derby is a very good idea. I couldn't, and I couldn't even stand talking. But we'll get there. It might not even be this podcast, but we'll get there. I want to stick with the Eclipse Awards for now. So it's always interesting to see what people end up fixating on and talking about. Most of the awards straightforward. We obviously did. You helped me with my ballot, which we did together on the air about a month ago. One big whiff that made me feel maybe a little bad, at least for a second, was we didn't even have Unique Bella in the top 3. Now, granted, Matt Bernier, who was listening in real time, chimed in with a text that was like, "No Unique Bella for Sprinter? Why not?" He was on the right path. We whiffed on that one. What were we thinking?
I still don't really get it, to be honest with you. I mean,
really?
I love her. I think she's the most talented filly, and I think she won, and I think she's going to have a phenomenal year, and everyone will look back on it, and they'll have no problems that she won Sprinter. But she won one big race, right? I mean, she won the not the Malibu, excuse me, the La Brea, right? That was her grade 1 that she won. Since when is the La Brea a more important sprint race than the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint? I don't understand. I'm not upset about it.
She had the early year work.
But that was 2 turns. She won one race around 1 turn earlier in the year, and the rest of them were 2 turns.
That's interesting. I thought there were 2 wins. So, okay, I see where we were coming from.
And even if there was 2 wins, she won 3 races against restricted 3-year-olds.
That's also a good point. Okay, you're making me feel better. I was worried that I was going to be one of those people singled out for ridicule on Twitter, like the poor guy from a few years ago who failed to vote for Zenyatta for older female. You don't want to be that guy, but you're making me feel better about it, which is good. The other couple of other awards that seemed to generate controversy and were close. One had to do with 2-year-old, which went to Caledonia Road.
Yeah.
And we had voted for Rushing Fall.
Yeah, that's fine. We both kind of said that, I think I was more intrigued by Rushing Fall, but I was not offended by Caledonia Road. You know what I mean? I get it. I think the Breeders' Cup Juvenile filly should carry a little bit of a heavier stick than the other races, even the Juvenile fillies turf. So I'm fine with that. I would have been fine the other way as well.
And then the one where people really came out of the woodwork, it surprised me. It reminded me of the devotion that fans had a few years ago for California Chrome. And if you said anything, remotely negative about California Chrome, you'd hear it from people in social media. I didn't realize that Bolt Doro had a similar fan club. I was dressed down for explaining my rationale for voting for Good Magic over Bolt Doro. Look, I get it. I mean, I get the case. And to me, yeah, you don't want, in an ideal world, your champion doesn't just win one race, but in an ideal world, your champion doesn't win, has more of a resume even than what Bolt Doro did. Where do you have any second thoughts on that one?
Yeah, my second thought is that I was upstairs at Christine Lee's hanging out with TVG's Dave Weaver, who was the first time I've really hung out with him. He's hilarious, by the way, absolutely hilarious. There was no sound up there. We went just for the opening of the show and the cocktail party before, and then I left the Eclipse Award. So what you're telling me right now is something I don't know. So Good Magic didn't win?
Good Magic did win.
Oh, he did win. Okay.
But then I was, my sanity was questioned for voting for him.
Oh, no. Okay. I thought you said
he only won by 13. No. I meant the I'm sorry. Gee, you were only there, JK. I thought you might know who won one of the most important awards and contested awards there was. Call me crazy. But,
I told you and Craig this morning when you guys were yelling at me about my phone cutting in and out that I didn't know everyone who won. I warned you.
You absolutely did. No, Good Magic won. It was, I think, the tightest of all the awards. Look, I get the case, and maybe let me ask you this: when you think about Bolt Doro's big win, name of the race is escaping me. Is that the front runner? The race where he had the best speed figure from a 2-year-old, where the race was artificially depressed to be even as low as 103, and he really, on a raw or scale would have run more like a 108. Should that factor in when a horse has a performance that good on the clock? Should that factor in and make you say, okay, I know he was beat head to head by the other horse on the day, but that was still the best performance by a 2-year-old. Should we have given him more consideration based on that alone?
I mean, McLean's music is a sire based on a buyer number, right? So right. I think that it can be considered. I don't know if we want it to be the deciding factor. I'd like to use it as more of a tiebreaker. If I'm ever lucky enough to vote on the Eclipse Awards, I think one of the things that I would do is something along the lines of, if you win a Breeders' Cup race, you get 10 points. If you win a Grade 1, you get 6 points. Grade 2, 3 points. Grade 3, 1 point. And then just kind of have a mathematical situation that kind of results, that kind of guides you in the right direction. Because I do believe that there needs to be more weight for winning a Breeders' Cup race. It is our championship event. It is against the best horses. There is no prepping. There is no funny business. And so if you win there, I think that it needs to carry a bigger stick, like I mentioned earlier. So
that's what it came down to for me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he won that race. I mean, I thought Bolt Doro could have won. And Bolt Doro ran pretty darn good in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, considering the fact that he was wide all the way around there. And
that was my next question. My next question was going to be, and this was something that a point that was made to me. Well, yes, Good Magic beat Bolt Doro, but Bolt Doro had this horrible trip. I'm not so sure, given how good the outside was, that I don't think it was your average 7-wide bad trip, which would normally be terrible. On that track, it obviously wasn't good, but I thought maybe how bad the trip was overblown. And I thought the real reason for the bad trip was that he didn't push off out of the gate, which, to me, that's one of those bad trips where it's on you as the equine athlete. You kind of caused your own bad trip by not getting out of there.
Completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. You cannot solely give an Eclipse Award to a buyer figure and or a bad trip, right? It's like you can use that as like a deciding factor when you're trying to break a tie, but the tie to me was broken if there was a tie, it was broken when Good Magic's Grade 1 was a Breeders' Cup race.
I definitely get the point, and I do feel for the Bolt Doro fans, but I just wanted to explain. I wasn't trying to rub it in or anything. I was just trying to explain the logic, and there is a logic to both arguments. But no, I feel good about where I was there.
Did you want to tell the listeners? And funny enough, the day you told me this was actually the day you hung up on me. That Bolt Doro actually, that horses actually do have hamstrings.
Yes, horses do have hamstrings. You may have been joking about that. It may not be the actual injury he had, but horses, from what I was reading, I haven't gone to vet school since the last podcast, but it is not crazy to talk about a horse's hamstring, as I was briefly worried that it might have been. So I do feel better about that. All right, you keep talking about the day I hung up on you. So I don't want to go too far into the weeds on this for several reasons. And one is, I think there's going to be a lot of news coming out of meetings that are probably happening right at this very moment down in South Florida about the future of the Breeders' Cup. But, I hate having the same opinion that everybody has. I guess it's part of being a horse player. You want to be contrarian. When it comes to the concept of the Breeders' Cup Derby, I'm afraid I am the main line of thought. Now, for those who haven't heard, there was some talk about potentially moving the Breeders' Cup Classic to a later date than essentially the rest of the Breeders' Cup, and instead running a restricted race for 3-year-olds on the day of the rest of the Breeders' Cup races. To say that I had a visceral negative reaction to the concept would be not nearly strong enough. I just feel like any idea that the Triple Crown races are so popular, not because they're 3-year-olds, but because those races have been around for so long and they've become these sort of cultural institutions. And as the year goes on, yes, it's fun following the division through the Haskell and the Travers. Obviously, in recent years, the Pennsylvania Derby has made somewhat of an impact. But, to me, by the time you get to October as a 3-year-old, there's no magic. There's no like marketing media magic, even to those later 3-year-old races that I mentioned now. And the idea that those horses should still be able to compete in a restricted way as late as October, I don't see it capturing fan interest. I see it, tremendously weakening the races that you could have. For example, the Pennsylvania Derby has more or less reverted the Jockey Club Gold Cup, which used to be this opportunity where the 3-year-olds stepped up and faced elders. That race has become a bit of a second-class citizen. Now, I'm not one of these knee-jerk change is always bad kind of guys, but I will say if essentially they were to move the Breeders' Cup, like the most important races of the Breeders' Cup, to a day in December where racing could command more of the attention, even if you were to do that, the race that you had on the old day shouldn't be a Breeders' Cup Derby. It should be some sort of shorter than the Breeders' Cup, some sort of mile and an eighth prep race that attracts all horses. And then I could almost see a world where you were trying to set up a later year Triple Crown almost between that race. Hell, maybe they could license the name. This wouldn't happen, but just for the purpose of my argument, license the name Jockey Club Gold Cup, or whatever that Breeders' Cup Prep is going to be, the Breeders' Cup Classic, and then have the Pegasus conveniently slotted in a month later. Maybe you could try to get something going like that. But the idea of separating the 3-year-olds that late in the year, to me, you're just going to weaken a whole lot of stuff, and you're not adding anything. That's how I see life. Any comment, JK?
Yeah, I got a few. First of all, and this is not just like some radio joke or whatever. Like, that meeting is literally happening in the suite next door to me.
You are kidding.
No, I'm not joking. It really is happening. The board meeting is like
Can you get in there? Can you get in there?
Yeah, I can. I was in there yesterday for the wagering. I was in there for the wagering. I'll just walk in and act confused and see if I can like look on a whiteboard and see if there's any info.
A big X through the words Breeders' Cup Derby, maybe big X through that.
So here, I got off the plane when I landed here in Miami, and I saw that this had kind of been released, and I thought to myself, this is the worst idea I have ever heard in my entire life.
So we're not far from each other.
With that said, I was fortunate enough, and forgive me, and hopefully this is an annoying thing to say, but I spoke to a board member about the idea, and that board member explained it to me in a much better way. And I can't give all of the details; it just would be unfair to the board member.
We're told in confidence, yeah. If you're told in confidence,
I can give a little bit more of a vision for what they were trying to accomplish. First of all, it's not about the Belmont Derby. The Breeders' Cup Derby. That's just an aside. What it really is getting a more prominent spot for television for the Classic. I think that as we're all horse fans, so we can watch 2 days of racing, and it's not a big deal. We're not overwhelmed by it. We actually probably could take a little bit more. For the average fan, 2 days of racing, it's hard to keep their attention for that long. Also, in November, they're up against other college football, and it can be challenging in that way. The idea, I think, to a certain extent, is to create a Belmont. I keep saying Belmont Derby.
I do the same thing. I don't know why we're doing that to ourselves.
Because it's probably because that's the last and only Derby there needs to be. The Breeders' Cup Derby would show up on Breeders' Cup Saturday. There would not be a Breeders' Cup Friday. The dirt mile would not be a mile anymore. It would be very similar to what you said and suggested for a shorter version of the Classic as a prep. They would run all of the turf racing on that Saturday because you can't move the turf racing because because of the Europeans. Their schedule is
Are you
winding.
sure about that?
You told me that, and other people told me that.
I didn't say that. I said it would be a concern. But,
yeah, well,
you have European horses running in Hong Kong and Japan in December. Like, it's pretty easy. I could give you the 6 trainers and owners you'd want to call over there and see how violent the reaction was to it. It wouldn't shock me. I agree it's a challenge, but I'm open. All I'm saying is I'm open to the concept of exploring moving the date. That's not where my knee-jerk reaction comes in.
No, of course, no, of course, but I do think it's at least problematic for an organization who's been trying to increase European and international participation when you move your event to a date in which it's less conducive for them to do so. I think that's
that's fair.
So I think that and then the idea would be to take the Classic and a few other races and move them to December, where they're on NBC with nothing up against them, and that's kind of the basic idea. And I don't love it, and I don't really like it, but I like it more than my initial reaction when it was presented as if they're just gonna make a Breeders' Cup, a Breeders' Cup Derby. Anyway, it is what it is. I think it's not a terrible idea. It's not the best idea either.
I get to hating the idea of moving stuff later when the big turf races aren't able to be. I worry that you rob the day of a lot of the magic. I don't mind the idea at all about having like lesser Breeders' Cup races and prep races on the traditional date and coming back with like the 6 or 8 races that are really supposed to be Breeders' Cup races a month later, if there was a way to do it without compromising the foreign participation, which, as you point out, JK, you probably can't, so that's probably a problem. But I hate the idea of tearing it apart. And I'll just say this, and this is from a guy who once wrote an article in the New York Times about how there was no magic to the 5 weeks of the Triple Crown, and how I believe that it would be better for racing to spread out the 3 Triple Crown races so you had more horses competing in all 3, and you could get the public more plugged in and following along and have more of like, a real like playoffs, division rivalry aspect through the 3 races. This was, of course, during the long drought when it looked like there wouldn't be another Triple Crown winner again, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I made what was a pretty cogent case. And it was none other than Stephen Crist, with whom I spoke about the idea. And he was, basically just said, there are not that many things in racing that really work well. And our energy would be better served trying to correct things that don't work than fixing things that aren't broken. And I do worry that these kind of radical changes to this signature successful event are dangerous and have a serious potential of fixing something or breaking something that is fixed would be the fear. I do feel bad. I will say this. I feel bad for whoever had the idea, because in typical racing politics, if you read the article on DRF.com that I believe Matt Hegarty wrote, it's pretty obvious that somebody on the inside was trying to like shoot the idea down by like anonymously slipping certain details. And probably no accident, that's sort of the most absurd thing. The Breeders' Cup Derby was one of the things that was slipped out in the world about this. You could almost see somebody try to like create the kind of visceral negative reaction that I had to torpedo the whole thing. Because I will say this, it's smart to be open to changes, but it's also smart to be very careful about changing things that aren't broken. Fair?
Agreed.
See, now, if we just had that conversation the other day, I wouldn't have had to hang up on you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're halfway through this edition of the DRF Players Podcast. We've had all kinds of absurdity, sound problems, JK saying words he probably shouldn't have. Let's turn to some handicapping. What do you think? Have we covered this other stuff enough?
Yeah, I'm still convinced I said it under my breath, but I was probably louder than I thought.
Producer Craig will be the judge of that. let's talk about this pick 4 at Gulfstream on Saturday. It's going to culminate with the Pegasus World Cup. I want to leave. Well, if you're cool with this, JK, let's try to go through the first 3 legs fairly quickly, and then we will be able to spend a little bit of time on the Pegasus itself. It's a really interesting race. So I'll ask you this in the first order. When you looked at it, is this a wager that you're likely to participate in?
Yeah, I think so. I like a horse. There's a single in the sequence. It'll be the first race we talk about, and my hands are a little bit dusty, but I love a horse early. So yeah, no, I think it's a sequence that's definitely approachable. I guess if I had to knock the sequence, I don't like the South Beach, the turf race. I don't have an opinion there. I think it's a spread race. So, but it happens to be the third leg in the pick 4, so I'll play it. If it was the second leg, then I wouldn't. I would skip it. You know what I mean?
Explain why.
Well, because if you don't have to bet into pools that force you into races you don't have opinions on, right? If that's really,
then you could just play the double. I mean,
I could play the double,
yeah. But
then I'm not connected to the World Cup where I want to be connected to. So you, in this situation, you don't really have a choice.
You've tipped your hand a little bit, I think, that you think this is a bounce-back spot for Curlin's approval?
Yes, I do. I think she's going to win for fun. So I will.
Show your work, JK. What is it?
Yeah. What is actually? I hated showing my work. I never understood that. And if I knew that technology was going to be what it is now, I really would have given my teachers a hard time for trying to make me show my work in division. Like, why? I'm going to use my phone. No, I don't believe that you wanted to be on the inside at Gulfstream last time. There's really nothing else to that.
Gotcha.
The horse has won here 7 times at Gulfstream, and so I think she'll win again. It's one of those spots. It's a little bit like that classic Empire conversation we had in the Breeders' Fraternity a few years ago, when he was like, whatever, 8-5 or 2-1, and I thought I was like very proud of myself of like singling a horse like that in an 11-12 race 12 horse field, because there actually is a lot of value, although it doesn't feel like there's a lot of value because you're betting a shorty. But I think there's going to be a ton of value in the pool singling her, because I think a lot of people will try to get creative and find other ways to go.
There are certain horses that horse players, you look at a race quickly, and they're favorites that like just smell vulnerable based on potentially tailing off, like Curlin's approval, or all the attended questions back at that Arkansas Derby. Oh no, it wasn't Arkansas Derby. It was one of the 2-year-old races of Classic Empire. But there were attended questions about mental fitness and all these things. And when you can, Andy Sterling once said this to me, and it's always stuck with me. Sometimes the best way to be a wise guy is to know when not to be a wise guy. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at with those type of spots, yeah?
No, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So I think the horse is going to run well, and I think that like you said, other people are going to be try to get cute in that spot, and my cuteness is going to be to not fall for that.
I will throw in one price in here, JK. Number 11, Moonlit Promise, I think is a little bit interesting. In form, has some finish, has some races with some like rock solid form for the levels. Just curious to see what she could do. Obviously, much of the play, I'm not going to be playing against Curlin's approval, but I did want to give a little bit of love to Moonlit Promise before we move on to the 10th race, which we'll do, which, unless you have anything else to say about that, we'll move on and talk about now. And this is the Gulfstream Turf Sprint.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. I feel fortunate to be here. I think that if one of these horses wins, I'm going to get my picture taken.
We do have friends with a horse in this race. Alert! And your usual in this situation is just to default to picking and playing the friend's horse. But obviously we're going to be rooting for pay any price for the Matisse brothers. But in terms of handicapping the race, where did you land?
No, I mean, I think I picked 2 horses. I used him and Richard's Boy. From what I understand, and I don't know this firsthand, so if it's not accurate, I apologize, but Richard's Boy was not nominated, so he was supplemented, which is a pretty strong piece of confidence, right? I mean, supplement a horse for $175,000 stake race in January. Richard's boy beat Pay Any Price when they ran against each other at Pimlico, I believe on the Preakness undercard. There's actually some pretty cool pictures on Twitter of the rain starting right when that race happened, and so he got him there. But this is kind of Pay Any Price's home court, so hopefully he can turn the tables. He is faster than Richard's boy, but does he wear him down, I guess is the interesting part. The price horse I'm going to pay is Conquest. I'm going to play as Conquest Enforcer underneath, and also as a B horse in the pick 4. The horse was bought privately. Excuse me, not privately, at public auction actually, and taken from Cassie. Went out west with D'Amato, ran well in a couple of spots there.
Donut.
No, that's not Enforcer. That's Tsunami.
I was thinking it was either Enforcer or Tsunami, but then I was thinking it was Enforcer, but it's not. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and so now, but Enforcer ran well last time at Tampa, and it kind of was his first race back for Cassie. Ran well in there against Pay Any Price. So I think that horse is dangerous at a big price. So, but for me, it's just going to be the top 2 as A horses, and then Conquest Enforcer to pick up the pieces if it happens to fall apart.
I'll mention one more, and it's almost just a segue into a question I wanted to ask you / story I wanted to tell. Tombalane, I thought, was maybe just a little bit interesting in the barn of Catherine Day Phillips. And, as you can tell from the horses I've been talking about so far on this card, you can see I have a little bit of a prejudice maybe for folks folks and horses who are from north of the border, these Woodbine shippers. And I know you had at the Eclipse Awards last night, JK, a little bit of an interesting run-in with the Canadian.
Yeah, I told the story. It's funny. At the Keeneland contest, the green room, the only negative thing about the green room is they're high top tables.
They let Canadians in there? Is that what they let Howie Massis and his friends in there?
Their high top tables can get a little wobbly, and a gentleman, a Canadian gentleman, I actually don't even know his name. He's friends with Ray Arsenault.
Who we need to talk about after this, by the way.
Absolutely. Bumped into the table and spilled a glass of champagne on my keyboard of my new computer that I had probably got like 3 weeks before that.
That's good for it, isn't it? Little champagne.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, no big deal. I dried it off. I got an air compressor duster thing to kind of push the moisture out of there, and everything was fine. The keys have kind of started sticking a little bit, but I've kind of worked around that. And then yesterday at the track, my keyboard literally wouldn't work. It won't work at all. It still won't work today when I woke up. Last night I ran into the gentleman who was responsible for the bump, and he asked me, "Man, I still feel so bad. How about your keyboard or your computer?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, buddy, as a matter of fact, it stopped working today." And then his eyes kind of got big, and he goes, I really am sorry about that. And he walked away, and I was like, I've heard all these jokes about Canadians being really nice. I thought he was going to whip out a checkbook. And
I was going to say, could break you off 500 or something, for God's sake. If he's rolling with the Arsenal Parts posse, they're high on the hog. Nothing for you. No soup for you, JK.
Nothing.
Let's talk about Ray for a second. I thought he did a great job. Great to see Judy Wagner up there. Very cool words about horse players from, it was Todd Schrupp, right, who was up there with them as well. But Ray's speech was great, and just very gratifying to me to see such a beloved horse player, somebody who, along with Keith G., the late, great Keith G., was one of the first people to sort of like welcome me to the contest world when I went out to my very first NHC, back whenever that was, in 2014, 2013? Gosh, I'd have to check. How funny. But anyway, so cool to see him there. One of the good guys, Ray Arsenault, great to see him get his honor as Horse Player of the Year, and looking forward to hanging out with him in a few weeks as he attempts to defend his title out there in Las Vegas. I assume that was one of the pieces of the show you came back from the bar to watch, JK?
No, I didn't go back down there until it was over. So I knew it was happening, and figured I'd catch it on replay somewhere.
So you're telling me you're at the Eclipse Awards. You have the opportunity to be there, to see Nick Luck, to see Ray Arsenault, to see Saul Kuhn, Lady Eli, see all this amazing stuff. And you can't be bothered to stop betting harness racing at the bar upstairs with Dave Weaver?
Well, just to be clear, I wasn't betting. I was supporting. I was watching. I was rooting. But yes, that is the roundabout answer.
Well, at least he's honest, folks. All right, let's move on to race 11 here. I think you already said you did not have much opinion.
No, I really didn't. I mean, I used a ton of horses on out of the gate for the pick 4 that I gave. I used the 1, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think. I mean, it's just a tricky situation. It's turf racing at Gulfstream. It's very trip centric. So I mean, obviously Celestine is the one that everyone's going to be like, oh, she's probably going to win on class, but she can absolutely get beat. So I really am I'm all over the place here. I thought that the 9 Stormy Victoria.
That's who I like best.
It was closing into a slow pace last time, and so there's obvious. And Muggs agrees. I think
she agrees, and somebody's at the door. 2 shows in a row. What are the odds? You talk about this race. If you have to turn to the Pegasus, that's okay. I'll go answer the door. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Very professional episode of the DRF Players Podcast, by the way.
Yeah, geez. I mean, we're going to blame it all on you. I mean, you try to make me sound like the bad guy for saying a bad word under my breath, but you're the guy that just left in the middle of the show. Yeah, so I think Stormy Victoria makes a lot of sense, but I'm afraid that people are going to see what we all see and be involved with that horse and play there. But yeah, I'm going to just try to stay alive in this race. I'm going to just try to get through. Hope for a price. If Celestine wins, it could be problematic. If you're playing the pick 4 similarly to the way that I kind of laid it out, I think that it makes sense to potentially open up 2 DRF ticket maker windows, have Celestine as a single A in this spot, so you can have a little bit more money on Celestine and maybe Stormy Victoria, and then have another ticket that kind of spreads a little bit more. So it's kind of a concept we've talked about before. I call it kind of like the double A, where you give someone a bit more push. So if you don't want to be upside down on your ticket, if it happens to be one of the shorties that wins this race.
I do like Stormy Victoria. I think that you make a good point, though. The Gulfstream turf, sometimes known as DRF, it can be hard for those horses sometimes with closing kick and or who aren't in perfect position at the pace call. And you can see she's come up short there twice. So I'm not going to go crazy there, but for me, I would make sure I'd be okay losing some equity with Celestine, and I would want to press Stormy Victoria a little bit. That was my read on the race for whatever it's worth. And then we have
Whoa.
What's up?
Who's at the door?
Oh, the mailman. You know, it's. I guess he's like in this rhythm now of showing up at 11:45 every day, and this is the perils, folks. Brooklyn living lesson here: the perils of living on the first floor. So anybody gets a package. You know, God forbid the guy take a look and see it's apartment 3 and buzz apartment 3. No, I think he knows that I'm usually here. It's apartment 1. So he just goes ahead and hits it. And I just got to remember next year to tip him more and tell him, you know, never ring the bell between 11 and 12. It could be like that scene in Goodfellas where they assault the mailman and say, you know, no letter from that kid's school comes to this house. No ringing the bell between 11 and 12 on Tuesdays and Fridays, and we can straighten them out that way. What do you think?
You made me think of I don't know if you've caught up on the new Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's an episode where Larry has a situation with a male woman, an attractive male woman, and so he doesn't know if he should call her male woman or male man or whatever, and then he needs to give his neighbor this book back. And he asks the mail woman if she'll like take it over because she's going. You know, he's like, "Hey, would you drop this off for me?" And she's amazing. Like trying to make him put postage on it.
They're not supposed to do that. That's great.
Yeah, very funny.
I'm not up to date on Curb. I came up with the silly idea that I was going to rewatch the whole show before this season, and I started rewatch season 1. Was loving it. Probably around the time I started saying pretty good on the podcast, and then I got distracted. I'm doing other things. So now I'm sort of torn. Do I go back and watch from season 2? Do I just watch the new season? At any rate, always excited to see what's going on with our buddies Larry David and Richard Lewis, and hopefully they will be back for another season without a 6-year break this time.
Is Richard Lewis? Is Is he related to Rashard Lewis?
They do have similar senses of humor. There's definitely something there, but I don't know. But Richard, I don't know. I think he must have thought I was my father or something because he followed me on Twitter. And he hasn't unfollowed me, so I don't know. He could be listening for all I know. It's always good to. I've been an admirer of his for a long time, so good to see him rocking and rolling there. All right, let's get to this Pegasus. We could spend the rest of the show on it if we can motor through it to any degree. Well, let me just ask you this: have you had a chance to look at all at the Rainbow Six races for tomorrow?
I haven't. I know. You know what's funny is we talked about it yesterday. I called you with this proclamation that we owe it to the listeners to talk about it. We need to be on our blah blah blah, and then
life gets in the way.
Yeah, I didn't look. I have not looked.
It's a shame. Anyway, every horse player worth his or her salt should be looking at this. It will almost certainly be the force out of the Rainbow Six carryover and a positive expectation situation, those rare opportunities where more money is going out of the pool than is going into the pool, something everybody should be looking at. Next time, let's just say right now, next time we'll do some sort of special webinar on it. And who knows, maybe we should be not so lazy, JK, and we can always tweet thoughts later if we have anything interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably a fair compromise we can do is just tweet out a few horses that people can use or include.
It's just hard when you have, a day's racing like Saturday ahead of it. But anyway, okay. So then we do have listener questions, which might all get bumped. Hey, what was Eric? That's unusual behavior for Eric Bialik to force us to answer a question on air. Did he have something that was worthy of interrupting mid-show, or was he just funning around?
Well, still hasn't texted me anything.
Okay.
Last text I have from him is, "Want to talk before the pod?" ?
Anyway, maybe he sent it to me. I'll take a look if we have time at the end. If not, Eric, you'll wait in line like everybody else. And the Pegasus. We're both going to have the same clever idea in here, aren't we?
Yeah, yes, we are. But let me warn us both that Gunrunner is really, really good.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if he's too good and it doesn't really matter. That's kind of one of the things. To me, that's 50-50. At least that's 50% that he's going to win the race. I mean, this is not a favorite to be lining up to oppose by any means. And there are many, many situations where I would have happily said, Gunrunner is my pick. Don't overthink it. Single and move on, honestly. But there is this one other horse. Yeah, I just wonder how he's going to be ridden. And obviously people who listen to the podcast know who we're talking about without us even having to talk about him. I just wonder how, or say his name, I wonder how he will be ridden. I think Irad will be forward on Sharp Azteca. I think that he will go on with it and not jack around. But in my opinion, he has a better shot if he goes 22-4 and 45-4 than if he goes 23-4 and 47 flat. I just feel like his chances of winning the race are actually better if he just tries to run them off their feet.
I'm so happy that Sharp Azteca was your idea because that was not my idea.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah,
you're Gunnavarian?
I'm Gunnavarian, and I'll tell you why. I think you could be right. You are right about, I think, the idea of Sharp Azteca just trying to gut them, hope the inside and speed are good, and hope, Gunrunner gets out of his comfort zone, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm worried Gunrunner from the outside post has to be ridden aggressively. I'm not that worried about the outside post for Gunrunner because of his tactical speed. Despite the daunting statistics, I think that those daunting statistics just mean whatever price you get, you're going to be getting 20 cents more than if he'd drawn the 5. And I don't think it compromises his chances that much. But I do think race shape-wise, it means he has to be that much more aggressive. But I also remember, one of the rides that caused you to change your avatar to the egg, JK, what happened with Collected last time, I can't see them goofing around with him. Doesn't he have to be ridden aggressively too? And doesn't this mean that there is, I almost feel like the I see the race in two. I see really three scenarios, but one of them is small enough that I wasn't going to really even talk about it until it was your idea. I get your scenario of Sharp Azteca drills him. The other more likely scenarios, I feel like Gunrunner is the best of speed, blows up the other speed, has too much of an advantage, cruises home, 5 in a row, end of career, great horse, off to the stud farm. To me, that's almost like a 50% of the race. But then the other situation I see is they go too fast, Gunrunner's a little tired, and, local boy who's been running against the grain of racetracks, at least in the stretch last time in the Breeders' Cup Classic, Gunnevera returning to the scene of some of his best races, puts in a surprising effort. I mean, this is a horse who I liked at a long price in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I feel like he had an excuse going to the rail in the stretch. Where, there are many people smarter than me who think the track had sort of flipped by that point. And if they're right, might be kind of a hopeless pick. But I just feel like potentially improving 4-year-old, once again, home court. I think he's the best closer in the race probably. And I could see a world in which he gets it done at 15 or 20 to 1.
Yeah, no, he's my B horse. I had two A horses, Gunrunner and Sharp Azteca, and then I used Gunnevera as a B horse. And that was it. When you mentioned Collected, and here's a conversation I think that at least needs to be had about Collected is how is a horse who was 5th, 4 lengths off, an unbelievably slow pace in his last race, going to then press a horse like Sharp Azteca? I just don't think he's naturally fast enough.
That's fair.
I mean, he couldn't find the lead in the race in the San Antonio that Giant Expectations won. I just don't see that happening. I mean, I guess that from what I understand from an interesting conversation is Giant Expectations is not going to be sent. He's going to try to follow. So I just think that Sharp, and no one wants to go with Sharp Azteca, right? None of these connections want to say like, oh, you know what? My best chance to win is to go head to head with that horse who's trained by Jorge Navarro in Gulfstream. Like, yeah. No one's ever said that. And so
Gunrunner is the one who's likely to be close enough that when the real running starts, around the turn. I mean, it's a dirt race. The real running starts from the gate. But when the race is won or lost, the idea that Gunrunner would be close enough to crack him makes a lot more sense. I just, I threw that out there about Collected just because I do think Smith will be, I think he'll be very aggressive with him, that's all. And if they're trying to if they do the wrong thing and are trying to nurse Sharp Azteca to get the distance and Smith is aggressive, I see a scenario where that could happen. But I take all of your points.
If Gunrunner goes 22-4, 45-4, he wins the race for fun. But I'm 100% sure that won't happen. But if he did,
explain what you mean. I get it, but explain what you mean by that for those who
I just don't envision him from the 10 hole with Sharp Azteca in the race and Floron riding and being so talented that they're going to take that gamble of just being super aggressive and putting him on the lead. I don't think that they're going to do that. If he's on the lead on the backside, I don't care how fast they're going. He'll absolutely win. It's not even close. But I just don't know if they're going to do that.
Quick aside, where was Floron last night?
Funny enough, I ran into Kate Bradar, and I was talking to her because I'm friendly with her husband, Doug Bradar, who happens to be a contest player, absolutely, and he's also Floron's agent. And I asked where Flo was because I knew he was riding Gunrunner on Saturday, and Gunrunner was going to win a couple of awards tonight, and I figured that he would be in the house. But let's wish him luck this morning. He's taking his citizenship test in Chicago, and apparently the people in charge of administering that test could care less about you winning an Eclipse Award or riding on a $16 million race the next day. There's no rescheduling, so good luck to him on that.
Godspeed, Florent, in more ways than one. We're leaving a horse out who I would have zero problem with anybody who wanted to make an A, even though he's obviously not, my top pick by any means. But what's wrong with West Coast? Why are neither of us feeling the juice there?
I'm just not a West Coast fan. I've heard his workout was phenomenal. I haven't seen it or seen any of the commentary about it. I just heard it was amazing. But I'm just not a believer. I'm just not a believer. He's always found himself in an advantageous spot of a racetrack, and I want nothing to do with him. If he beats me, then he beats me. But I just don't think he's that good.
Seems a little harsh, but I mean, it's a fair point about being in advantageous places on racetracks, I suppose. You can go back, 4 races maybe, and make that argument.
The Travers,
Los Al.
Yeah,
I mean, remember, like a lot of people made a big deal about it being wide. We watched that race here in the bunker, and I think it was one of those days where outside was where you wanted to be.
Belmont.
And Pennsylvania Derby, wasn't that kind of like a speedy outside flowy kind of day too?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that wasn't one that jumped out.
Well, he won by 7 too.
Yeah, that was actually in fact, that's the only race that he has run since the Easy Goer that makes me question my theory that he's not that good, because he was good that day. But every other race makes me feel good about the idea that he ain't that good.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit. I mean, big figures, some big wins. Again, that idea that a horse could, I mean, I would think I wish I had real numbers for this, but change when you make the turn from 3 years old to 4 years old, there's a certain amount of speed figure points I expect you to improve. You start putting that in there. I'm just saying I see the case with him. I wouldn't blame anybody who wanted to use him at least defensively. But for me, I would want to get paid. I would want to hit if Gunrunner won, and I would want to get paid if Gunnevera won. And if I had some, I don't think I have such super clever ideas in the rest of the horizontals that I would need the West Coast Savers. But if you had something really good in the first 3 legs, I wouldn't want to get beat by West Coast. That's all I'm saying.
I would. He can't win.
I like it. I wish I liked him more. We'd come up with some sort of facial hair bet. Let's talk about some specific questions we got. There was a little bit of a conversation on Twitter with podcast host emeritus Mike Hogan chimed in. The question originally was somebody who liked Stellar Wind to hit the board, and I read it wrong. Originally, I read the question as, I think the 4 logical horses will run 1, 2, and Stellar Wind will run 3rd. Should I place Stellar Wind in the bottom of a try? And if you really like those horses, I think that is, a very sensible. If you like those horses and you like Stellar Wind to get a piece, that is a sensible way to play it. Podcast host emeritus Mike Hogan suggested that was overcomplicating things, and if your real opinion was just that Stellar Wind's going to be at least 3rd to bet to show. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I'll be honest. I woke up this morning and I had a few adult beverages last night, and I saw that I had some tweet mentions, and I saw the word show, and I put my phone down.
In other words, you feel about show the way that I feel about Breeders' Cup Derby. You see the word and you just start breaking out in hives.
I think I hate the word show more than you hate the word Breeders' Cup Derby. Here's the thing. No, I completely
just don't
disagree.
hang up on me, man. We got 1 more minute left in the show here.
Well, I would never do that to you, Pete. That's you. You're the guy that does that. No, so here's the thing.
It was wet. The microphone wasn't working. You kept talking about the Belmont Derby, the Breeders' Cup Derby.
I disagree. I don't think that's how you handle that situation. If you like Stellar Wind and you think that she's going to hit the board, you need to hit the try. The show bet's you're not going to be rewarded enough for that opinion. So I think that you need to find a way to try to get the try, to use some of the horses we've mentioned, not including West Coast. Sharp Azteca, Gunrunner, Gunnevera, and some giant expectations possibly underneath, some collected maybe underneath, and try to just hit the try with Stellar Wind in it.
Hitting the try is a much better idea from an ROI point of view. Long shots to show are the worst bets in racing. In racing, usually the answer to every question is, it depends. Well, how about this? Well, it depends on all these other factors. I can't think of any time where a long shot to show is an efficient way to bet. And it's mathematical. A big part of the problem is breakage and the money that ends up getting robbed from your bankroll, despite the theoretical lower takeout because of the breakage. It should pay $258. It pays $240. I mean, that's money being taken right out of your bankroll. It's much more efficient to try to get there in the try, and obviously, you got to use a little bit more opinion, and that's a danger. But in my view, the complications are worth it.
I completely agree. If you want to bet show, then it's like betting the Patriots minus 600 in the Super Bowl. Like, enjoy.
If you're only getting minus 600, JK, you need a new bookie. But we've got to get out of here. I had received word for a minute that Matt Bernier might be running late from producer Craig, which meant we were like vamping and stretching a little bit. But Matt Bernier's there. He's ready. He's about to go on air. I don't want to steal his time. And I want to thank you, JK. Thanks for showing up. Some great observations, some good semi-reporting, gossip reporting coming out of the Eclipse last night. Godspeed in the Pegasus World Cup betting challenge over the next couple of days. Check out DRF tournaments, folks. We got the WCH World Championship of Handicapping. Big money, no takeout. Final opportunities to qualify happening now. Tournaments.drf.com. Want to thank producer Craig, Willie Nile, Travis Stone, most of all of you for listening. We will be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.